Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the BytesBurn podcast. And I am your host, Stacey Onuora. And with me, as always, is my amazing co host, Idris Lawal. And we're so excited to be here with you today. Welcome to our existing subscribers and watchers. And you all that are new here, welcome as well. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe. So we're back today with fresh perspective and fresh news about tech globally. And we'll be kicking off with the price increase for Apple products. So Apple had announced that they'll be increasing their prices. So if you wanted to get an Apple gadget, it's on your wish list. Now is definitely time to get it because in a couple time, in sometime in the near future, these prices would increase. And this is basically attributed to the fact of RAM shortages. So basically, a lot of tech giants are building massive AI data centers, and these chip manufacturers need to they're the priority customers, to be honest, right now. So they need to be able to supply them with all the RAM and parts that they need. So every other parts or every other industry or sector might suffer due to that. So basically, it's not just affecting Apple, right? To be honest, because major computer manufacturers like Apple, Microsoft, Google, they need this RAMs to be able to build out their gadgets. So definitely, the price increase is something that would be coming. So just do you have any Apple gadgets you're eyeing? Is this something you're going to get now? What do you think about, the RAM shortages that are going to cause this price increase?
Yeah, I think, yeah, like you rightly mentioned, this isn't just an issue that's affecting Apple. Other major manufacturers of PCs and phones have also, been talking about the issue about the fact that RAM shortages is affecting them. And I think even for some of the smaller brands, for example, I use a Nothing phone, and Nothing is one of those niche brands in the US that is not very large compared to the other guys, and they also are having this same type of issue, and also looking at like raising prices or even skipping some models that we were supposed to launch this year. So Apple doing this is for them also to also maybe balance the books in terms of the cost of production and the price that they will have to eventually sell at. So
Yeah.
if you but the interesting thing is that the price increase is not linear. It's not the same across the board. Like all the devices have different ranges of price increases. Some for as little as 30 USD, all the way to 1,000 USD plus. So and interestingly enough, the iPhone is actually not affected by the price increase. So they've raised prices for even the Vision Pro, which I don't know how well it's selling. I mean, I'm not sure I've seen anybody around me using this Vision Pro,
Yeah.
partly because of the
Mm.
price, because it was already around $3,000, at inception, and that has even increased now to even higher prices. I think it was 3.5, and it's around 3.7, and the other things that they make, the AirPod Max, everything else, price increase across the board, but the AirPods and the iPhone are actually unaffected. And you would see that they've attributed this, of course, to the fact that, as you mentioned, AI data centers are being built around the world, and there's this huge demand for chips. A lot of these data centers, they need a lot of these chips for
Mm.
AI processing, and we are seeing that as like sort of a ripple effect across the board. And we would also want to look at there is also a lot of geopolitical tensions around the world where the US is trying to shore up their their dominance as the tech giant. And then there's also China that is also coming up with building their own stuff and building their own capabilities, and they've been making the rounds recently. So um,
Right.
the chip industry is obviously under a lot of sort of pressure to
Right.
deliver for data centers, deliver for everyone else.
Mhm.
And if you look at actually the places where these chips are manufactured, there are not very many. A there's one huge organization in Taiwan that is called TSMC that makes you know vast majority
Chips.
of all the chips that is used
Mhm.
across the world. And then there are some other companies like Samsung that also make their own in-house chips. Samsung makes the Exynos chip, but it's not, of course, not as good as the ones that are made by TSMC in terms of their capabilities and all that. And
Mhm.
it's a very it's it's a market that is dominated by a very few number of large players. Recently, China is
Yeah.
also coming up with building their own in-house chips because some time ago Huawei was banned from accessing chips that are made in the US, and that has forced a lot of Chinese companies to look inwards and build their own
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah, so
Mm.
the global chip, there's an actual global chip race, for making these things, and that's really driven by AI and
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and the data centers that it requires to process. So yeah, so all of this is like the ripple effects of on all these gadgets, and Apple for sure is raising prices as well. And I think
Mm.
maybe some other brands would also be raising prices, maybe in their newer generation devices. You would
Mhm.
probably see some of these other brands as well raise prices in response to that. And people typically tend to follow Apple, once, in terms of when it comes to the mobile phone market, especially, once Apple does something, the other players in the industry tend to just
They
follow
just
the
follow.
same. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think other guys may
Mhm.
also be raising prices soon.
So the demand for it with this AI era is basically, much higher than they can supply, at least, like you mentioned, the quality as well. So with the demand, they also need to increase supply. So obviously that drives up prices, and since Apple is it that's you mentioned, the follower thing, right? And it's like, oh, if Apple is able to successfully do this, or yeah, let's, follow since they've done it successfully, let's just follow, what they have as well.
Mhm.
Speaking on the okay, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and I think for Nigerian people in Nigeria and rest of Africa, it's going to cause some bit of burden, because already procuring Apple devices here locally is already some bit of burden, because the uh exchange rates differences and all that stuff. So you want to buy
yeah,
a Mac now, for example, you're looking at the millions, all right? So, and that's already
mm-hmm.
out of reach for a lot of people,
Yeah,
and iPhones and all that stuff. So we may see, more people going towards Androids in terms of like maybe phone. Um,
yeah,
Although the iPhone was not, impacted, but
mm-hmm.
there's this thing with people locally where once there's a price increase somewhere, they tend to just translate it everywhere else and be like, "Oh,
Everywhere
Apple is increasing
exactly.
prices,"
They
and
increase pricing.
they just increase, locally they can just decide to increase prices across all anything Apple. Once it has Apple name, they increase
Mm-hmm.
price on it, even
Yeah.
if Apple is
Mm-hmm.
not increasing prices on those things. So we may begin to
Mm-hmm.
see things like that. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Android is already doing fantastically well for a lot of people. So unless for people who really like Apple products, or have special requirements to have, an Apple products, will be buying it, and everyone else, the Windows, the Androids will be, selling better in the market, when this price increase actually hits.
Yeah. I know one thing we know how to do is adapt because I mean the prices of Apple products have increased over the years, but people are still loyal to the brand, right? They still get it regardless of the price. So, let's see if, generally they also increase its iPhone prices and people are still loyal regardless of the price and, the exchange rate to top it, with
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
that.
that loyalty comes with if you have the money to buy it. So if
Yeah.
you
That's
if you
it.
have the money to buy it, then yeah, you can keep being loyal. But at some point, you know, if you can't afford it anymore, I mean, the loyalty will clear in your eyes. Yeah.
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 Yeah. That's right. So you were also talking about, the fact that people want to manufacture, their own chips, so that they're not very reliant on, all these external parties. So maybe, them having their own partnerships. And we had seen that OpenAI had done a partnership with Broadcom to do their own custom chips. I think they had called it Jalapeno, right? So we can see that OpenAI is trying to have its own like chips and not depend on the general market. So what do you think how do you think that's going to affect, OpenAI itself and then just generally with other companies, you think that they would also be looking at doing their own partnerships and building their own custom chips with the growth in interest rates?
Yeah, yeah, we've seen that Nvidia over the years has really grown tremendously. I think their valuation right now is
Mm,
at around 5 trillion. So they've
trillions.
gone
Yeah.
beyond all the legacy giants in the US, like the Microsofts, the Apple, the Googles. They went,
Yeah.
they just skyrocketed beyond them, and that's because they have successfully captured that market of AI infrastructure.
Mhm.
So whenever now you need to run high quality, you need a high quality chip to run AI inference and all of this stuff. You need a GPU, and the world leader in GPUs is Nvidia. And these AI companies have been using NVIDIA and NVIDIA infrastructure for quite some time. And, they will also be looking at the amount of the costs that they are pouring into these data centers that they have. So I think it's
Exactly.
only natural for them to also begin to look at what other ways can they cut down on costs and also ensure that they are not over reliant on another company, because if Nvidia decides to change something and it affects them, they also need to be able to respond on time. So I think that's why they are coming up with their own chips. That's OpenAI, to try and shore up their business. I mean, there's no way they can disconnect from Nvidia like in the future. They have like, I mean, they built a lot of stuff on NVIDIA chips already. So I think this is just for them to also begin to have some backup, where they can switch to, or so as to at least reduce the reliance on NVIDIA chips and GPUs. So for now, I think it's still a bit in the experimentation phase, and they are also, they're also going to be progressing with that. Who knows how well the new chips work? There will also, of course, be benchmarks that will be done across board to see how good it is. But yeah, this is the way forward for most of them. I mean, OpenAI has been spending huge amounts of money on data centers across the US.
Yeah.
So it only makes sense for them to begin to want to control some of the um, items or devices and the infrastructure that they use in these data centers.
Mm. That's actually like, I mean, you mentioned, the dependency on, just to reduce that dependency and also see if they can reduce cost as well, by having, something else that can, facilitate their infrastructure and things like that. But even now that we're speaking about OpenAI, right? I'm sure we all heard the news about, Fable going off and coming back. People are excited. I know there was a colleague that was, talking about it, like, oh, they were using Fable, and then next day it went off. And, just because of the regulations around it, they had to take that off. But now it's back, and it's like, do people have the same sentiment about it like they had before when it initially came out? I don't know if you use the Fable, but I didn't use it, right? So it was just based on people's perceptions and what they had said about it. But did you use it? What do you think about it going off and coming back? Do you think like it affects how you see it when it came out initially and right now?
So the first time it came out, I actually didn't use it. I don't know how good it was as at that time. But now that it's back, and I use it for the same, I've used it for the same things I used Opus 4.8 for. And
Mm,
to be honest, I've not seen any huge difference in um, its abilities. I've not seen any huge difference from Opus 4.8 because that's if you I used it for coding, right? So the kind of I gave it the same kind of tasks that I would give to Opus, and it produced like similar kinds of results in terms of like the things that I would expect it to do.
mhm,
Say, find a bug in a code somewhere, refactor something, re-architect something. Most of the responses are still very much close to what Opus 4.8 would do, and I don't see it's not better than. I also use Codex. It's not better than what the GPT 5.5 would do, for example. So I don't see the huge, difference in the abilities right now. And I've seen some articles on Reddit forums where people are talking about the fact that the new when it was released, now that it's been released the second time, it's basically not as good as the first time. Partly is feeling like it's been watered down. A lot of people feel like what the initial one was much more performant than the current one is now. Um, and yeah, that also speaks to like the export controls right now in the US regarding AI, where
yeah.
there is a lot of inconsistencies in terms of can people use this model or not, and it's like a closely guarded, secret right now. Where you remember Mythos as well, Mythos 5 when it
Yeah.
came out. There was also a lot
Mm-hmm.
of guardrails on it where people they are not allowing a lot of people
Reproduce
to
it. Yeah.
access it and all of
Mm-hmm.
that. And you would
Mm-hmm.
see that this is in stark difference to what the Chinese AI companies are doing. The likes of DeepSeek and the other ones, the GLM 5.2 that just came out. You would see that they are building and releasing to the open source market immediately. There is less amount of censorship or blockage from accessing these models, and you would also look at the fact that the ones while the ones in the produced by Anthropics and the OpenAIs are seen as the frontier, some of these new models, especially like GLM 5.2, is not very far off the frontier models in terms of performance and the abilities that they possess as well. So it's quite in like two different worlds, and a lot of people who are using these US models are also using these Chinese models now as as a backup because
I don't know
there's a
what
bit
happened.
of uncertainty, yeah, where the company wants to release one new models and or even an existing model that you already use, the export control in the US can decide that maybe it's not it's too dangerous to be released to the public, or they don't want the public to use it or whatever. And that uncertainty is too much for a company. So a lot of people would definitely be seeing the value of using the Chinese models because they are just releasing these things back to back. And it's there's also been a lot of progress on that side as well. Previously, they used to say, okay, maybe Chinese AI models are like 1 year behind or 2 years behind the frontier in the US, and now they are like few months behind. So it's an interesting time with all this AI arms race between China and the US, and I mean the rest of the world is basically just we are just users at this for right now. They're not there.
Yeah.
Africa, well, for now, it's not at that level. And
You're not in the race.
and also, if you look at the rest of Europe as well, I mean, there's no, I'm not seeing any huge, what's it called, um, AI models coming out of Europe as well at this time. So, um, aside the ones we see from China and the US, which are basically like the frontier, the rest of us are, just using, pull from Hugging Face or Olama, wherever you get your open source and run stuff. So it's an interesting time. US China are vying for the dominance in this AI space. But I think we are not at the apogee or the zenith of AI yet. There's still a lot of room
Much
where
more.
we
Mm.
to grow, and these LLMs are not like the end. We still have, I believe we're still gonna have like a lot of more advanced models, more intelligent models that will be released, and it's an interesting time for anyone working in tech right now, to navigate all of these shifts.
Yeah. Like you said, these are interesting times, with the AI arms race and, just seeing that there is much more to come. So, what's that saying? Something, the race is not to the swift. I've forgotten the rest part of it. Yeah, and there's
I'll
like a
assume
lot
I
more
know
to come.
it, but I don't.
Oh yeah, just like looking forward to that and seeing what comes out of it. Because again, we consumers are like, okay, I mean, keep giving us the good stuff. We'll keep consuming, right? Um, But yeah, that brings us to the end of this episode of the podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have, things to share, your opinion about what's going on with the price increase or, AI having its own, OpenAI having its own custom chips or the race between, the US and the Chinese models, leave a comment, do like and subscribe, share with your friends and families and just people you generally know. Thank you and bye.
Bye.